Now, looking at, within that context, looking at these numbers from today's report, here are some of the more significant numbers trade was looking for. And we see the USDA putting the corn yield at 169.9. The trade was looking for 168.2. Last month we were at 169.5. Our client survey is at 166.9. So question is, who's right? Well, we really don't know until we get to January when the final numbers are released. There is a tendency for these numbers to move from month to month as USDA accumulates more data, and that's going to be the case here as well. We can look at some patterns and some tendencies, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but this is part of that movement. Now, as we look at the soybean yield, 49.9 bushels per acre, if verified, that'll be the second largest yield on record below last year's yield. It came in 1.1 bushel above what the trade was expecting. It came in very close to our client survey. So here again, what's right? Ironically, as we look at the yield models I have, and I have a traditional yield model that I've been using over the last 5 years, a yield model that we developed that we were hoping would be a little bit more accurate for this year. And then we wrote yield models for every state, and we do a state-weighted then yield model. And all of them are relatively close to each other right now, kind of confirming for us what the traditional yield model says is 169.7. My bias as a past certified crop agronomist is that we're probably closer to what our clients are telling us at 166.9. But that's not what USDA says. That's not the numbers they're printing, and so that's not the numbers that this market is going to trade. We'll look at it in January and see where we come out. And by the way, our client survey is not designed to estimate where USDA will come out in September or October or November, but it is designed to be what our clients say they believe USDA's number will be in January. Last year, and in past years really, we've been relatively close. We'll see how it comes out this year. On the soybeans, I told you what the yield models, or what our survey, client survey yield is there, just barely below it. Our yield models, though, are much closer to 47.7. That's where my bias is on the soybean crop, and really, we probably need to look at this in context. In the August report, the yield that USDA comes up with is mostly subjective in nature, based on surveying farmers and taking some plant populations, air population stuff, but heavily weighted toward the surveying of farmers. The October report, corn and soybean crops are largely mature, and so for the most part, they can weigh the ears, they can weigh the pods, they can take objective data. So the yield will be based off of that. In September, it's somewhere in between. Where the crops are mature enough to take objective data, they do so. Where they're not, they lean more on the subjective data. So September's kind of in between. So your accuracy and your confidence goes up with each successive report as more objective data becomes available. Here again, we'll see where we end up. The big question for me, and why my agronomic training is a little bit lower in yield, is the lower pod counts, which USDA acknowledged in today's report, but it had implied pod weights that were almost record high, if not record high, that don't have the history going back many years, but in recent history it's up there. And while we were very mild over the past month, about 40% of the belt was also very dry, and we're still trying to figure out just what exactly was the impact of the dicamba vapor drift on the soybean crop this year as well. I hear a lot of different things from a lot of different agronomists, and most of it does not give me confidence we'll be able to come up with a yield this high.